Hi, my name's Dravina. My own mother once stood over me, holding a belt, while my stepfather laughed, ordering me to scrub his son's toilet and serve the king. When I refused, they broke my arm, threw a single dollar in my hand, and shoved me out the door without even a toothbrush. They erased me like I was dust on their floor. But here's the thing. Tools can rust, and I knew exactly how to make them crumble. Before we dive in, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you listening from? Drop a comment, I want to know. Snow had been falling since before dawn, covering the narrow streets outside in a thick white blanket. From the laundry room window, I could see the sagging fence and the bare trees shaking in the wind. My hands worked on autopilot, folding shirts, matching socks, just trying to keep the cold from settling too deep in my bones. The little space heater in the corner had given up weeks ago, so I kept my coat on while I worked. The door flew open without a knock. Mom stepped in, cheeks flushed from the kitchen's heat. "Brent's up," she said sharply, like it was a warning. "Make him breakfast, eggs, toast. Don't burn the bacon this time." I kept folding. "I've got to be at work in an hour. I'll grab something on the way." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Work? That part-time cashier job? Brent's got classes. He needs a hot meal. He's the king in this house. You," her eyes skimmed over me like I was dirt under her shoe, "can clean his toilet." From the hallway, Brent leaned against the doorframe with a slice of bread in his hand, grinning like he'd won something. "Hear that? King Brent? Has a nice ring to it." I ignored him, stacking the last towel on the shelf. My pulse was already thudding in my ears, but I kept my voice even. "I'm not your maid. You're grown. Make your own breakfast." That was enough to bring Ed stomping down the hall. He filled the doorway like a wall, leather belt looped in his fist. "What's this I hear about disrespect?" I straightened my back, but before I could get a word out, the belt cracked against the air, once, twice, and then across my arm. The sting was instant, sharp, stealing my breath. "You don't talk back in my house," he barked. Each lash was a punctuation mark, his voice riding over the snap of leather. I bit down hard, tasting iron, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a scream. Brent stayed put, chewing, eyes lazy. "Guess she's not hungry anymore," he muttered. When Ed finally stopped, my skin burned hot under the thin fabric of my sleeve. He pointed toward the kitchen. "Feed him or get out." Mom's voice slid in right behind his. "Worthless. Always have been." I stood there, frozen, knowing anything I said would only give them another excuse. Years of this, ever since she remarried, had taught me silence was the only shield I had left. My protests had always turned into proof I was ungrateful, proof they could throw in my face later. Without a word, I walked past them to my room. The tote bag by the bed was small, but it would have to do. I shoved in 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, my worn sneakers. My wallet lay on the nightstand, one lonely dollar bill inside. No coins. I thought about grabbing my toothbrush, but it was in the upstairs bathroom. The sound of the shower running told me Brent was in there. I wasn't about to open that door. Pulling on my thin coat, I stepped into the hallway. My arm ached where the belt had landed, but my legs carried me forward. The air outside slapped my face with cold, a shock that almost felt clean. Behind me, the door clicked shut. I heard the lock slide into place. That sound, sharp and final, settled in my chest heavier than the snowflakes melting on my skin. They'd erased me, like sweeping dust off the floor. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while Mom told me, "Family doesn't abandon each other." The words had been warm then, a promise. Now they tasted like ash. The sidewalk was slick, and each step left a shallow print in the snow. I didn't look back. The bus stop was just ahead, the metal bench dusted white. I sat down, the cold biting through my jeans, tote pressed tight against my side. My breath rose in small clouds. My fingers felt stiff, but inside, something had already shifted. They'd spent years raising me like a tool, something to be used until it broke. Now I was walking away, and they had no idea what I would do next. The bus groaned as it pulled up, tires hissing against the slush. I climbed the steps, the smell of wet wool and diesel wrapping around me. The driver barely glanced up. I slid my last crumpled dollar into the fare box, the metal clink echoing louder than I expected. The heat inside was almost suffocating after the bitter air outside. It should have felt good, but instead it made the welt on my arm throb under my coat. I kept my head down and moved to an empty seat near the back, pressing my tote against my side like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. Outside the window, the snow blurred into streaks, the familiar outlines of my town fading into gray. We passed shuttered diners, old gas stations with flickering signs, and then nothing but highway and snowfields. I remembered the last time I'd left that house believing things could get better, heading to my first job interview, wearing my one decent blouse, thinking maybe I'd be able to help the family and make them proud. That had been years ago, and it hadn't worked out the way I'd hoped. Now I wasn't leaving for opportunity. I was leaving because staying meant disappearing completely. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up to a blank notifications bar, no missed calls, no texts. I swiped down again, like maybe I'd missed something, but there was nothing. My thumb hovered over Mom's name in my contacts. For a second, I imagined her voice, sharp, impatient, telling me to stop making a scene and come home before you embarrass us further. But the silence on the screen told me exactly what I needed to know. In the past, even a few hours without hearing from her would twist my stomach in knots. I'd wonder if she was angry, if I'd forgotten something, if I'd messed up again. Now, nothing. No check-in, no "where are you?" Just a void. It hit me then. Not only were they not chasing after me, they weren't even leaving the door cracked. Whatever role I'd played in their lives, it was over. By the time we rolled into Columbus, the sky had shifted to that dim winter afternoon light that makes the streets look older than they are. People hurried past the bus stop, bundled in thick coats, their breath clouding the air. I stepped off the bus and followed the flow of strangers, each one with some place to be. I wandered for a while, past storefronts and half-empty diners, until I spotted a narrow brick building with a flickering neon vacancy sign. The front window was cloudy with condensation, and the lobby looked as tired as I felt. Inside, the man behind the counter didn't ask questions, just named a price. I slid a folded $20 across the counter, the emergency bill I'd kept hidden in my sock. The only thing I hadn't told them about. He handed me a brass key and pointed to the stairs. The room was small, dimly lit by a single lamp. The bedspread smelled faintly of bleach, and the curtains were stained with something I didn't want to guess at. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off my coat. My arm had a dark mark now, angry and swollen. I grabbed a thin motel towel and wrapped it around my forearm, muttering, "Just bruised. It's fine." Lying back, I let my eyes trace the cracks in the ceiling. A memory rose up without asking. 15 years old, Mom telling me family first before handing me a double shift schedule at the diner. The money, she'd said, would send Brent to his sports camp. "It's for the good of the family," she'd insisted. Back then, I'd believed her. I thought my sacrifices meant I belonged. Now, staring at that stained ceiling, I could see it for what it was. Family meant Brent's needs. Family meant my labor. It had never meant me. The thought didn't make me cry. It made something settle in me, heavy but steady. If they could erase me without a second thought, then maybe I could erase them too. Not out of spite, out of survival. I reached for my phone again, but this time I opened the bus schedule app. Not to find a way back, but to see what other places were within reach. The list scrolled by, names I'd never been to, some I'd only heard in passing. It was strange how nowhere to go could suddenly look like Anywhere I want. I powered the phone off completely and set it on the nightstand. In the dim light, I whispered to no one. I don't need them. 3 knocks sounded at the door. Slow, deliberate, 3 times. I froze, unsure if I should answer. I didn't move at first. The room felt smaller, the air tighter, like the knocks had vacuum-sealed the space. I slid off the bed quietly, careful not to jostle my arm, and stood a foot from the door, listening. 3 short taps again, not frantic, measured. I leaned to the peephole. A man stood there, late 40s maybe, wearing a diner apron over a flannel shirt, steam ghosting from a small paper bag he cupped in one hand. He didn't look like security. He didn't look like management either. He looked like a neighbor who had shown up with a casserole you didn't ask for. Evening, he said, pitching his voice soft so it wouldn't carry down the hallway. Didn't mean to spook you. I'm from the diner next door. Saw you come in earlier. Thought you might need something warm. I slid the chain into place, cracked the door the width of 2 fingers. You are? Name's Earl. He lifted the bag. Tomato soup. On the house. Cold night. The smell, rich and garlicky, slipped past the chain and into the room. My stomach answered before I did, a small, traitorous growl. I kept the chain set, opened the door just enough to take the bag. His knuckles were red from dishwater. The skin along his jaw was rough, like he'd shaved without a mirror. Thank you, I said. Polite, neutral. He glanced past my shoulder, eyes trying to make sense of the dim lamp, the suitcase, the towel wrapped around my arm. You here by yourself? My friend's parking the car, I lied easily. Survival had trained me to keep answers short. She'll be back any minute. He nodded, but his gaze lingered a beat too long. The smile he gave me didn't quite meet his eyes. Well, these motels can be unpredictable. Lot of strangers in and out. You ever need anything, the diner's open late. You could pick up a couple shifts if you want cash. We pay at the end of the night. It sounded generous on the surface. But I knew the rhythm of that kind of offer. I'd heard it in different rooms with different wallpaper, favors that came with strings, help that kept a ledger. I pulled the bag closer to my chest. I'll think about it, I said. I appreciate you coming by. Sure thing. He tipped his chin like we were already acquainted. Didn't mean to bother you. I closed the door until the chain pulled tight. Earl stayed on the other side a second longer than necessary. I could feel it. Then footsteps, slow, unhurried, moving away toward the stairs. I slid the chain free, turned the deadbolt, clicked the flimsy latch for good measure, and dragged the dresser until its legs squeaked against the cheap carpet and butted against the door. The weight of it calmed the tremor in my hands. The soup had soaked the paper bag a little at the bottom. I set it on the nightstand and found a plastic spoon in the packet. The first mouthful burned my tongue in a way that felt almost kind. I ate half, then capped it and tucked the rest into the tiny room fridge. No telling what tomorrow would ask of me. I'd learned not to consume every comfort on the first pass. I sat back on the bed and spread the contents of my tote: wallet, crumpled receipt, a pen, the room key, the sock that had guarded my emergency 20 now flattened to nothing. I counted what was left: a 10, a 5, 4 ones, and some change I coaxed from the bottom seam, $19.12. I lined the bills edge to edge, squared the corners like the money might multiply if it believed it could behave. On the dresser stood one of those laminated cards with local services listed in faded type. I flipped it over. Hospitals, towing, pizza. In the drawer, under a gnarled phone book yellowed at the edges, I found a stapled flyer: shelters, day labor, cleaning jobs. I circled an ad with a dull pencil: hiring, cleaning staff, weekly pay. The number looked like it had been printed on a typewriter 3 owners ago. All the better. Places like that didn't ask for much more than a name and the ability to show up. The motel's heater hiccuped to life and shut off again. I rubbed my forearm through the towel, testing what hurt and what was only tender. "Just bruised," I whispered, as much a boundary as a diagnosis. I had given that house too many words. Tonight I kept the rest for myself. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, the room humming with the low buzz of a vending machine in the hallway. Through the thin wall, a TV mumbled, then clicked off. Somewhere outside, a car idled and moved on. Small sounds, ordinary ones, not the kind that warn you. The clock on the nightstand ticked in a rhythm that began to steady my breath. And then, beneath my palm, the phone vibrated. I'd powered it down earlier to keep myself from waiting on a message that wasn't coming. Now I realized I had probably brushed the side button when I reached for the lamp. The screen glowed to life, lighting the ceiling with the faintest blue. One notification pulsed. Voicemail. My chest tightened. The caller ID spelled a name my hands knew by heart. Mom. I sat up slowly, set the soup aside, and thumbed the screen awake. My reflection looked back at me for a second, hair flattened on one side, eyes too tired. And then the icon waited. Before I pressed play, I did what I always did. I prepared myself for her voice to sound like love and followed by rules. I pictured the kitchen back home, the clock on the wall, the stack of dishes I used to scrub silent to avoid setting her off. My mouth felt dry. I wasn't a child at that sink anymore, but the body remembers. I inhaled, counted to 5, exhaled just as slowly. That trick had gotten me through more than one long night in that house. It would serve me here too, but I didn't press play yet. I got up. I checked the chain again, the lock, the dresser. I looked through the peephole, saw only the hallway light bleeding into empty space. The diner neon fluttered across the parking lot like an eyelid trying to stay open. No one was there. Good. Back on the bed, I drew my knees up and set the phone between them so it wouldn't slip, so I couldn't drop it and laugh in relief by accident. If the message was apology, I would listen. If it was punishment, I would endure it for the length it took to delete. Either way, I would decide what to do next. Not her. My thumb hovered over the triangle. The room seemed to hold its breath with me. Whatever it is, I told the screen, it doesn't define me. I pressed and held, then stopped, an inch from committing. Not out of fear, out of order. If the message was bait, I needed a plan after I heard it. If it was a demand, I needed a boundary ready. I wasn't going to step into a familiar trap without laying my own map on the floor. So I laid out the pieces. Soup for the morning. $19 and change. A number circled on a flyer. A door blocked by a dresser. A phone in my hand that I controlled. That last part mattered more than I wanted to admit. I let my finger settle, ready to hear whatever waited. My finger hovered over the play button, but my chest tightened. I hit it anyway. Her voice came through flat, almost clipped, like she was reading off a grocery list. Don't come back. Your stepfather says if you show your face here again, we'll call the police. You've embarrassed us enough. You made your choice. Live with it. Then silence. No pause. No hesitation. No, are you okay? Not even a goodbye. I sat there on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the phone like it might start explaining itself. My thumb pressed the phone to my palm until it hurt. I don't know what I expected, maybe a trace of the woman who once tucked me in at night, or at least some basic human concern. But there was nothing. Just that same cold tone that had been growing over the years, now stripped bare of any pretense. I thought about the weekends I'd scrubbed their kitchen until my knuckles bled, cooked dinner for my stepbrother while my parents went out, hoping they'd look at me and see someone worth keeping, hoping for a thank you that never came. And now I understood. It wasn't just that they didn't want me in the house. They didn't want me in their lives. Erasing me would be cleaner. The hollowness in my chest ached in a way I couldn't quite put into words. But I knew one thing. They weren't going to hear me cry. Not again. Not ever. I deleted the voicemail and set the phone down on the nightstand like it was something contaminated. I forced myself to move. The air in that room felt stale, like it had soaked up my humiliation overnight. I stuffed my few clothes into my duffel, shoved my toothbrush and charger on top, and zipped it closed. My wallet was thinner than I liked, but I still had enough for a week if I was careful. Staying here one more night wasn't an option. The sun was just starting to climb over the low buildings across the street when I stepped outside. The morning air cut through my sweater, brisk enough to wake me up, even after a restless night. I kept my head down, walking toward the bus stop 2 blocks over, the strap of my duffel biting into my shoulder. I told myself I'd find work before the day ended. Any work. The bench at the stop was empty except for a woman in her late 50s, her silver hair pulled into a loose braid. She glanced at the brace on my arm, then back at my face with a look that lingered a second too long. "You're Dravina, right?" she asked, her voice low. I blinked. "Do I know you?" "Not really," she said, with a small, wry smile. "Name's Maribel. Used to live a couple houses down from your folks. Moved away about 8 years ago." She studied me for a beat. "I know what they did to you." "You're not the first." The words landed like a pebble in a still pond, small but sending ripples in every direction. I didn't respond. My instinct was to shut down, but something about her tone wasn't cruel or nosy. It was knowing. She glanced toward the street as the bus approached. "You don't need to trust me, but you might want to talk to someone who's been where you are." Before I could ask what she meant, she reached into her coat pocket and slipped a small, folded piece of paper into my hand. "She can help you. Don't tell them." The bus doors hissed open. Maribel stepped on without looking back. I stared at the paper for a moment before tucking it deep into my jeans pocket. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but it was the first thing in days that didn't feel like a dead end. Across the street, a small diner had a handwritten "Help Wanted" sign in the window. Cleaning shifts, part-time. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tightened my grip on my duffel and crossed over, telling myself to at least ask. As my hand reached for the door, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. I turned. Earl was standing in the motel parking lot, arms crossed, watching me. Our eyes met, and his smile was nothing like yesterday's. Didn't move from where he stood in the parking lot. His eyes stayed locked on me, and that grin of his had none of the fake charm he used when other people were watching. It was tight, calculated. "Dravina!" he called out, loud enough for people on the sidewalk to glance over. I kept walking, forcing my steps to stay steady. I didn't even turn my head. Behind me, I could hear it, the sound of his boots on the concrete. Not fast, not running, just deliberate. A rhythm meant to close the space between us without looking like a chase. By the time I reached the corner near the diner's entrance, his shadow stretched beside mine. "You think you're free?" he murmured, leaning close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Mom says you'll come crawling back. Everyone does." I gripped my bag tighter, kept my gaze ahead. "I'm busy." That only seemed to encourage him. His tone dropped lower, each word pressing in like a shove. "You won't last a week out here. You never did learn how to stand on your own. Remember when you were 8, crying in the shed because Dad told you to cut the grass and you couldn't even start the mower?" The memory flashed uninvited. My hands on that rusty pull cord, the ache in my arms, the shame when they laughed about it at dinner. I swallowed hard. "I'm not 8 anymore." He gave a quiet laugh that wasn't friendly. "We'll see." I stepped inside the diner without looking back. The warmth hit me first. Coffee brewing, something frying on the grill. A woman with dark curls pulled into a bun, glanced up from behind the counter. She had a kind of worn-in kindness in her eyes, like she'd seen plenty of trouble but still chose to be decent. "Can I help you?" she asked. I saw the sign, I said, for the cleaning shifts. Her smile widened. I'm Patrice. We could use someone reliable. Can you start tomorrow morning? Just a trial, see how it works out. If it's a fit, we can make it regular. It took me a second to process. Yes, absolutely. She jotted my name on a clipboard, gave me the address for the back entrance, and told me to bring gloves if I had them. Walking out, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Lightness, maybe small, but real. A start. Then I saw him. Earl was leaning against a lamppost across the street, his phone to his ear. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just watched me with that same tight smile until I turned the corner. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the motel, sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of instant noodles when my phone rang. Hi, Dravina. It's Patrice. Her voice sounded different now, careful. I'm really sorry, but something came up. We can't bring you on after all. The noodles turned to paste in my mouth. Did someone call you? A pause. Let's just say it's complicated. I wish you the best. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the wall, the quiet pressing in until I could hear my own heartbeat. It didn't take much to figure out who had made that call. Earl hadn't even waited a full day to make good on his little prophecy. By dusk, I was walking the back alley behind the motel. The air smelled faintly of garbage and rain, but I needed the space. Each step pulled up another memory. My mother's dismissive looks, my stepfather's cold remarks, Earl's smirk when he got his way. Every time I thought I'd hit bottom, they found a way to dig deeper. My hand slipped into my pocket and brushed the folded paper Maribel had given me. That tiny scrap felt heavier than anything else I was carrying. I stopped under a flickering streetlight, pulled it out, and stared at the number. I could keep doing this, waiting for the next blow, patching myself together just enough to survive the next one, or I could try something else. The fear I'd been carrying all day shifted. It wasn't gone, but it was sharper now, pointed in a different direction. I took a deep breath, punched the digits into my phone, and lifted it to my ear. A calm female voice answered on the second ring. I've been expecting your call, Dravina. My grip tightened on the phone. The voice on the other end didn't rush. You don't have to explain, Maribel said. I know who you are. Something about the way she said it, soft but certain, made my stomach tighten. Do you? I asked. I do, she replied. Your father used to bring you to the shop on Saturdays. You'd sit on that little red stool by the counter while he worked. You always had a notebook with you. I froze. That wasn't something you could find out from gossip. You knew my dad? I was his bookkeeper, she said. Before, everything changed. Her voice dipped when she said it. I leaned back against the thin motel pillow, pressing the phone harder to my ear. What changed? Earl's father, she said without hesitation. Started moving money out of the shop. Not big amounts at first, just enough to keep anyone from noticing. But it added up. Your dad didn't see it until it was too late. The bills piled up. The bank took the building. I stared at the stained ceiling tiles. My father's face, the way he used to smell faintly of motor oil and coffee, flickered in my memory. I'd been too young to understand why the shop closed, why his shoulders slumped when he came home. You're saying my stepfather stole from him? Yes, Maribel said. And I have something you need to see. We agreed to meet in an hour at the public library in one of the small study rooms. Safer than a cafe, quieter than a diner. I walked there with my hood up, cutting through side streets to avoid the main roads. The sun was starting to slide down, painting the brick buildings in long shadows. By the time I stepped inside, the warm hush of the library felt like another world. Maribel was already at a table in the back, a manila envelope in front of her. She looked exactly as she had in the diner, steady eyes, no wasted movements. Here, she said, sliding the envelope toward me. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single folded letter, the paper yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it and read. It was from a lawyer, dated 2 weeks before my father died. It warned him about irregularities in the business accounts, naming Earl's father directly. It said there were legal avenues to reclaim the stolen funds. The signature at the bottom made my chest ache. This wasn't rumor or hearsay. This was proof. "This was never sent to you," Maribel said. "I believe your mother intercepted it. If you'd known, you might have claimed what was yours." I sank into the chair, the weight of the letter settling over me. All these years, I'd believed the shop was gone because of bad luck or poor timing. But it had been taken, piece by piece, by the same people who'd spent years telling me I was nothing. "They'll come after you if they know you have this," she warned. Fast and hard. I folded the letter back into its envelope. "Let them try." Her lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "Just be careful." We parted at the library doors. I walked back to the motel with the envelope tucked deep in my bag, my fingers brushing against it every few steps like I needed to make sure it was real. By the time I reached my room, the streetlights were on. I closed the blinds, locked the door, and laid the letter on the bedspread. It looked small there, but I knew it was bigger than anything they had ever thrown at me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just thinking about how to make it through the next day. I was thinking about how to make them answer for every single thing they'd buried. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A new text. No name. Just words that sliced through the air. "You think we don't know where you are?" The motel room suddenly felt smaller, the shadows thicker. I stayed still for a long moment, listening. The low hum of the fridge in the corner was the only sound, until a crunch of gravel outside broke it. I edged to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek through. A shape slipped between 2 parked cars, too quick to catch a face, but there was purpose in the way they moved, like they knew exactly where they were going. My hand found the envelope on the nightstand, my thumb brushing the edge as if to remind myself it was real. I double-checked the deadbolt, then slid the security chain into place. My breath fogged the glass as I looked out again. The lot was empty now, save for a few scattered vehicles under dim yellow light. Maybe it was just another guest, I told myself, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. Minutes ticked by. Then, the doorknob twitched. Once. Twice. I froze, the envelope clutched tight against my chest. A soft scrape followed, metal against metal, someone working the lock. I picked up the motel phone, dialing 911 with steady fingers, even though my pulse was hammering. "Yes, I'm at the Elmwood Motel on Route 23, I said. "Someone's trying to get into my room." The operator's voice was calm, telling me officers were on their way. With my other hand, I yanked the phone cord from the wall. It was thick and coiled, heavy enough to swing if I had to. The scraping grew faster, more urgent. Then, faint but growing, the wail of sirens. The sound seemed to spook them. A shadow moved across the small gap at the bottom of the door, then vanished. Silence. I kept my eyes locked on that door until a knock sounded. Not the frantic kind, but measured. "Columbus PD," a voice called. 2 officers stood in the hallway. They took my statement, glanced around, and confirmed they'd seen no one. Still, my gut told me this wasn't random. They hadn't been after me. They'd been after the letter. After the police left, I checked the lock again, then sat on the bed with my phone in hand. It buzzed. This time it wasn't a text, a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low and even. "I'm not on their side, but you didn't hear that from me." "What?" I started, but the line went dead. I stared at the phone, his words replaying in my mind, not on their side. Whoever they were, I didn't need a name to guess. A new text came through seconds later. No signature, just an address and a time. 10:30 p.m. Miller's Diner, off 71. It was risky, but something told me this wasn't the kind of chance you ignored. I tucked the envelope deep into my jacket pocket, zipped it shut, and left the room without turning on another light. The drive to the diner took 15 minutes. The highway was quiet at this hour, just the occasional truck rumbling past. Miller's was one of those places that hadn't changed in 40 years, neon sign buzzing, parking lot cracked and patched a dozen times over. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fried onions. I scanned the booths until I saw him, a man in a worn leather jacket, sitting alone, one hand wrapped around a mug. He gave a short nod toward the seat across from him. "You came," he said simply. "Didn't leave me much choice," I replied. He didn't waste time. "I've worked with Earl's son long enough to see what they've done to you and what they've hidden from everyone else." My hands stayed flat on the table. "Go on." "They've been moving assets out of state for years. Real estate, cash, even business shares, making sure if anyone tried to come after them, there'd be nothing left to take. I have proof, bank statements, property records, all tied back to them." I studied his face. He looked tired, like someone who'd carried more than he should have for too long. "Why tell me?" "Because watching them crush people who can't fight back makes me sick, and because you're not afraid of them. You might actually use this." From his jacket pocket, he pulled a small USB drive and slid it across the table. "Everything's on there. You'll know what to do with it." I picked it up, feeling its weight, even though it was light as air. That's when I saw them, two men in the corner booth, pretending to read menus but glancing our way just a beat too often. I didn't look away. If they wanted me to be scared, it wasn't going to work this time. I stepped out of the diner without rushing, letting the cool night air settle around me. The two men in the corner booth had followed my every move in there. I made sure they saw me walk out steady, chin high, not giving them so much as a sidelong glance. My car was parked under a flickering light. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and pulled away without looking back. 15 minutes later, I was knocking on the side door of Carrie's apartment. She was a friend from the old neighborhood, the kind of person who didn't ask unnecessary questions. When she opened the door, I just held up the small USB drive and said, "I need your laptop, the secure one." We sat at her kitchen table while the screen glowed to life. My hands were steady as I plugged in the drive. Folder after folder opened, each one like a brick being added to the case against Earl and his son. Bank statements with transfers to shell accounts, property deeds in other states under fake names. And emails, so many emails, bragging about reallocating community project funds for better uses. Then I saw it. A picture of my stepbrother, leaning back in a lawn chair, drink in hand, grinning at someone off camera. The caption under the photo, from an email he'd sent to one of his buddies, read, "Why would I ever get a job when Dravina's the one keeping the lights on?" I sat back, letting the weight of it all settle in. There it was, not just proof of theft, but proof of their contempt. Carrie set a mug of coffee in front of me. "What are you going to do with this?" "I'm going to make sure the whole town hears it," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it was firm. I called the community board right then. The clerk sounded startled when I asked to be added to that evening's meeting agenda, but she didn't say no. "I'll mark you down," she said, almost under her breath. The next hour was a blur of printing documents, organizing them into neat stacks, and making copies for the local reporters I knew would be there. I rehearsed my statement out loud while Carrie stapled the last packet. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dragging the truth into the light. By the time I walked into the community hall that evening, the place was packed. Folding chairs filled every aisle, and people were standing along the back wall. Earl sat in the front row, jaw tight, with my stepbrother slouched beside him like he couldn't care less. When my name was called, I stepped to the podium. The microphone squeaked once before settling. I laid the first stack of papers in front of me and looked out at the room. "I'm here tonight," I began, "to talk about where your money has gone." I started with the bank statements, explaining each transfer, naming each shell company. A few people gasped when they recognized the names on the property deeds. Then I read excerpts from the emails, the casual way they talked about taking funds meant for community projects. Finally, I held up the photo. "And here," I said, "is what your so-called community leaders think of your hard work." I read the caption aloud. The murmurs in the room turned sharp, like a low growl moving through the crowd. My stepbrother's face drained of color. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "This is lies!" he barked, but no one seemed convinced. A reporter near the front snapped his picture mid-shout, the flash freezing his panic in the air. A board member cleared her throat and spoke into her microphone. "Given the nature of these allegations, we will be opening a formal investigation into Earl and his associates, effective immediately." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a low, steady buzz of voices. I could feel the tide shifting right there under those fluorescent lights. Earl didn't stand. He just stared at me with a look that could have cut glass, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking away. When the meeting ended, I gathered my things and walked toward the door. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. One new message from an unknown number. "You've started a war you can't finish." I read it twice, then slipped the phone back in my pocket. I didn't flinch. If it was war they wanted, I'd been training my whole life for it. I didn't flinch. If it was war they wanted, I'd been training my whole life for it. 2 weeks later, I stood on the courthouse steps in Columbus, the winter air biting at my cheeks. The sky was pale and flat, the kind that made sound travel sharper. Across the street, news vans were parked nose to tail, satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters stood in little knots, their breath puffing in the cold as they spoke into cameras. I kept my coat buttoned up to the throat and my hands in my pockets, holding on to that same calm I'd carried into the board meeting. Inside, Earl and his son were facing a preliminary hearing. Fraud, misappropriation, asset concealment. The charges were printed in black letters on the docket, and I'd read them enough times that morning to commit them to memory. When the clerk called my name to testify, I walked past the row where they sat. My stepbrother slouched low, but Earl sat upright, his jaw set. He didn't blink. Neither did I. The prosecutor wasted no time. He laid out every document I had handed over, then added even more, records the investigators had dug up after my evidence opened the door. There were offshore accounts, luxury vehicles bought under false names, and a tidy little trail leading right back to the community fund Earl was supposed to manage. Then came the part that made the room shift. The judge read the motion to freeze all their assets, including the house I used to scrub on my hands and knees when my stepbrother barked orders from the couch. "Granted," she said, her gavel tapping once. Just like that, the place that had been my prison was locked out from under them. I didn't smile. Not yet. As I stepped down from the witness stand, a commotion broke out in the hallway. 2 deputies marched my stepbrother in, hands cuffed behind him. Word spread quick. He'd been caught trying to sell a vintage car that was listed as evidence. I stopped where I was, letting him see me. His face was blotchy, eyes darting everywhere but mine. Earl turned in his seat, drilling his stare into me like he thought he could burn a hole straight through. I met it, steady. The rest of the hearing went by in a blur of legal terms and date settings. When the judge dismissed us, I walked out into the cold, exhaling the tension I'd been holding for months. That afternoon, I sat in a quiet office on the 3rd floor of the county building. A stack of papers waited in front of me. With one signature, I severed every legal and financial tie to Earl, and by extension, my mother. The pen felt heavier than it should have, but when I put it down, my shoulders felt lighter. By the end of the week, I had keys to a small house on the edge of town. White siding, a little porch, 2 bedrooms. Paid for outright with the money I'd saved from my second job. Money no one had touched but me. The first night there, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea and listened to the quiet. No footsteps pacing the hall, no doors slamming, no voices calling me lazy or ungrateful, just stillness. I didn't fill the space with much, just what I needed. A bed, a table, a few framed photos that I chose myself. It wasn't about showing I could have more. It was about knowing I could have peace. If you're watching this and thinking walking away means losing, let me tell you, it doesn't. It means you finally understand what's worth carrying and what isn't. They raised me like a tool. I let them rust. And I learned, rust can't hurt you once you step out of the shed. For the first time in years, I woke up one morning without bracing for the day. I thought that was the end of it. But then, a week later, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew that handwriting anywhere. My mother's,